Hi everyone, I'm Lex, joining you from Nottingham today. And my talk today is about knowing your worth, looking after yourself when working in the industry we're in. These are all kind of lessons that I've learned over my career working in web agencies. And the title comes from a quote which I really love and that resonates with me a lot, which is, "Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm." Brilliant metaphor to convey some of the points that I want to talk about today. So a little bit about myself to start. In my personal life, I enjoy Pokemon. That's like my big thing. I like posting a lot of things about Pokemon. I like playing it. I like playing the trading card game, Switch game, Game Boy, all of that. Yeah, I'm one of them. As well as that, I really enjoy going to gigs and festivals, which really sucks right now because can't go to any. So I'm really missing that right now. So instead, I'm living my best life on Animal Crossing at the moment, which has been quite a godsend during lockdown. And last of all, I help organise another meetup, which is Nottingham based, but obviously we're virtual now. And it's called Design Exchange. We usually run that every second Wednesday, although I've shifted this month's one to next Wednesday because I'm talking tonight. So yeah, if anyone fancies learning a little bit about design, different kind of subject area, you can find some details at dxnevent.com. So I'll crack on. So I guess aside from all that, what's most relevant to this talk today is my passion and my career choice, which is that I am a designer. So I'm a senior designer at a company called JH who do e-commerce websites. I've got 9 years experience doing this now, and I specialize in digital design. I am multidisciplined though, so I have experience in brand design, print design, and most recently I've tried my hand at some motion graphic stuff, which is fun and challenging. And I can even say to this audience here that I have some coding experience too. I'll expand upon that later. So yeah, I'm not going to be going into technical stuff. That would be extremely intimidating in front of a .NET crowd. Secret, I don't know anything about .NET. Sorry, guys. But yeah, this talk isn't about design either. It's open to anyone who works in this industry or who wants to work in this industry. So hopefully, that's all of you here. So yeah, I'll kick off with what made me want to give this talk and why I wrote it. It started 9 years ago. I was straight out of uni studying graphic design, and then I went into a junior design role at a digital agency. So I'll give you an idea of how those 9 years have gone since then with a graph. So on the bottom axis is my progression as a designer, so from that junior point to now. And on the left side is what I would call the levels of OMG, WTF, like stress, anxiety, fragility, vulnerability. So yeah, this was kind of my progression for the first kind of 7 years. So naturally, as you get more experience, that kind of level goes down a bit and you get a bit more comfortable in your role. There's still challenges, there's still ups and downs. And then about 2 years ago, this happened. And yeah, my line pretty much went off the chart just about. I hit a breaking point and I had a total and utter breakdown. And the trigger for that wasn't a big deal. It was like a creative difference between myself, creative director, and a client. And it wasn't anything that was truly difficult to resolve. And it's not anything that I couldn't end up working through. So why the spike? Why that big spike in the graph? Turns out I'd let a lot of factors boil up inside of me I hadn't really addressed. And when you pump up a balloon with little bits of air, eventually it's going to burst. So that was that. So yeah, I'd like to kind of cover some of the lessons I've learned, and I'm continuing to learn over the past couple of years, and how I've tried to take the line back down here again. So around that time, this was what my brain looked like. It was telling me, you know, you're not cut out for this, basically. This one mistake and one kind of moment had triggered this sense of complete fraud in my head. And after like 7 years of experience in the field, I lost all confidence in my professional ability. So on my travels through the internet, I stumbled upon this article on Creative Review, like a creative design publication. And unfortunately it's paywalled now, but essentially it talks about imposter syndrome. And this was the first time I had ever heard of imposter syndrome. So I'd like to go over a quick explanation of what that is for those of you who might not know. So, originally called imposter phenomenon, it was coined by two American psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. Essentially, imposter syndrome is this feeling that despite overwhelming evidence to prove otherwise, you're a fraud. Like, you have fooled other people into believing like that you're actually good at what you're doing, even though you are, you know, you're professional. And I know that might sound kind of familiar to some of you. Like, when I started looking into it, I realized it wasn't like just me who felt like this. You know, sometimes you have those feelings that you think, is it just me? But no, the article talked about imposter syndrome from a creative perspective, and I got it. I had a grasp of all those feelings that I'd been struggling with, and I understood that it was actually pretty common for those in the creative industry to identify with that. So when I looked further, I saw that imposter syndrome wasn't just reserved for the everyday kind of person like me as well. So this is Jodie Foster, and she won an Oscar for Best Actress for her role in The Accused. And she said this afterwards in an interview. She said, "Excuse me, we meant to give that to someone else. That was going to Meryl Streep." Like, she said that as a joke, really. But, you know, she just won an Oscar, but she claimed that, like, everyone would find out that, you know, she wasn't good enough for it. And what's even more wild is this quote. So, "Why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this?" Now that is Meryl Streep who said that, like, that Jodie Foster was referencing as, you know, the pinnacle. And, you know, both of them have had their wobbles with imposter syndrome. They both are Oscar winners. In fact, Meryl Streep holds the record for the most Oscar nominations of all time in those big four acting categories. So if she can feel that way, you know, it can happen to anyone, even the masters of their field. So yeah, I really felt like that trigger, that big spike, could be explained by imposter syndrome. Like, I was a senior designer, like I knew what I was doing. I'd worked hard to get to that point. I've had years of experience, but my brain was just convincing me otherwise. It was telling me, you can't do it. So I took a step back at that point. I had to. And I realized that this wasn't the first time that I felt that way. Like, sure, it may have been the first time that it had that horrible consequence of like a proper mental breakdown. But I'd seen these signs and symptoms in myself beforehand. And what I found so useful in managing it was recognizing what triggered those feelings in me. And for me, it was getting negative feedback. And not just negative feedback, but really bad feedback. So feedback that you can't understand, feedback that you can't interpret. Like, I work in design, which is very subjective. So sometimes you get feedback like this, and you kind of go, I've got no solution. I've got no solution to that. That it's not constructive. And that's when I felt that's when I felt worthless and like fraudulent as a designer. So for other people, this kind of trigger might be something else. I know a lot of people fall back when it comes to negative feedback though, and it can be a very common trigger. So I did a lightning talk once on some good tips on how to handle negative feedback. I'll summarize them really quickly because I feel these are probably relatively design related. But the first one is to not take feedback personally, which takes a hell of a lot of experience to try and learn. But taking a step back, looking at feedback, not personally, it's not an attack on your work, can be really valuable, but it takes a lot of practice. Questioning bad feedback helps with that. So if you get that kind of bad feedback, like the first one where it's like, I don't like it, it's like, well, dig a bit deeper, ask more questions, like, what don't you like about it? Or, is it this part that you don't like? Start asking questions, delving deeper, and you'll start to find the solution. And then the last one is empathizing. So if you're working with a client, they might not have very good technical knowledge. They might be a messenger for some other stakeholders. Just try and put yourself in their shoes, and that can be quite helpful. So moving on from that, another thing which is hugely important in tackling these kind of wobbles is learning how to take a compliment. Something I think we could all do a better job of, to be fair. I get it, a lot of us are maybe British, and that is a very British thing to kind of brush off a compliment, and taking compliments can be hard, but for the sake of our brains, let's do it. So as an example, say you put a thing out there for the world to see. Now that'd be a piece of your work, or something along those lines. You put it out there on the internet for some people to see. You might get 10, 20, however many really good compliments on the thing. But then you get this one bad one, just this one bad one. And it's so easy to just laser focus onto that. Let me tell you, it's very easy for people to be negative on the internet, especially behind the anonymous kind of guys. But it takes a little bit more for people to be nice and complimentary, as rubbish as that sounds. So those positive messages and compliments are worth way more than these negative ones, and so are you and your work. So I ask, next time this happens and you start to get stuck on that bad comment, consciously pick out one of the good ones instead and try and laser focus on that. We need to start recognizing the compliments and maybe not focusing so much on the negativity, because it's just no good for your brain, especially if it's not constructive. You're never going to please or appeal to everyone. That's just the nature of humans. What you can do is shift your own focus and shift your focus onto kind of things that make you happy. Something else I want you all to try and avoid doing, and I know I've been guilty of this in the past, is that when we get a compliment, so when we get one of those good compliments, we can be very quick to associate it with something or someone else. So I'll give you an example. Say you did some work, piece of work, as part of a team, and you say this, and someone compliments you. Oh, I didn't really contribute much to that. It was all them, really. While it seems like you're being humble, it also diminishes your own contribution, and your contribution to that was super valid. So let's shift away from that. There's a much kinder way to kind of address this compliment, both to yourself and to the person who gave the compliment. Because when someone gives you a compliment and you shake it off, it's dead awkward for the person who gave you it. Just bear that in mind. So instead, we could say this. They complimented you on a piece of work that you did as a team. And then you can say, thanks, I worked really hard on that with the rest of the team. So that thanks the person that gave you the compliment, but it also addresses your input, because your input was really valuable. Yeah, we could all do with learning how to kind of apologize less, or, readdress the way that we speak about ourselves. Like, it's a really hard habit to break, but if you can recognize that it's something that you do, then you can start to kind of make those steps to make a change to that behavior. It sounds like really small, but it's like when people have self-deprecating jokes, eventually it stops becoming a joke. So the way that you speak to yourself and about yourself is just as important as the way that you speak to other people, really. Yeah, it's good. I saw this great little graphic on Twitter by Danny Donovan that addressed some ways of changing your language when you're replying to emails, and it's along those kind of lines of, you know, it has a more confident approach. It's a less apologetic way of replying to emails. So like one of the examples says, "I took a while, but you can deal." So instead of saying "sorry for the delay, thanks for your patience," like, it's really small changes in language, because language is really important, and I find this particularly relevant right now. So we're in this time where we can't interact with people face to face, and we can't convey the tone of our message if it's in written form. So tone is dead important in communication. It's half the battle. And right now I know I'm struggling with using the text-based comms as the main point of contact. So if you're communicating with your team, say on Slack or Teams or whichever tool that you use, I'm really finding that emojis are hugely important right now. And never in my life did I kind of think I would be saying that emojis are a vital piece of communication, but here we are. A smiley emoji could be the difference between someone thinking that you're coming across blunt with them or not. Like, a winky face can get across the fact that you're being a bit sarcastic. So it really helps. Like, people attach a feeling and a tone of voice to your text-based message, and that might not be the way that you intended it to come across. So by attaching emoji to it, it helps that person read it in the manner you want it to, just because there's some sort of visual element there. Like, I grew up in the time of AOL and MSN and text messages, and emojis were a huge part of that, or emoticons as they called them back then. Like, it's not a new technology at all. Like, emojis are a communication tool that they like transcend language. Like, they are a language in themselves, to be honest. And it's a really universal way of communicating with each other, no matter who you're speaking to. So if I can get my dad to start using emojis, I can get everyone here to start using them a bit more as well. So I'll move on now, and I want to talk about failure, and what it kind of means and how we can frame it. So sometimes we fail, like, it happens to all of us. But what I've learned over the past few years is how to fail in the correct way, which sounds a bit odd. But failure is an essential part of learning. Like, without allowing ourselves to fail, then we don't allow ourselves to make mistakes in which we learn from. I talked about negative feedback earlier, and for me, I saw that as a mark of being a failure. Now, I reframe that as an opportunity. You failed, that's okay. Because it's an opportunity to learn and grow and, you know, interpret what mistakes you made and be better next time. So we really have to accept failure, unfortunately, and use it as a way to move forward for the positive. So I'll move away from the feedback thing and frame this lesson in failing in terms of learning a new skill, for example. So say you're developing a new skill, learning a new programming language or something. For me, last year I started to learn how to use After Effects because I wanted to do motion graphics. I was really excited, really excited to learn. And then I just fell down at like the first hurdle. So I was setting up the workspace to start doing it. And at the time my brain was going to me, yeah, give up. You don't know anything about this. You're a designer. You don't know anything about like video editing and stuff like that. But instead of throwing in the towel, like I persevered with it. I got there in the end. After 4 weeks of learning it, I was doing client work, which is quite exciting. This is a tiny little 3-second clip of something I did. And how many times did I fail doing that? Let's play it again. Doing this, how many times? Hundreds of times. Like every time I came up against something I couldn't do or I'd done completely wrong, like my brain every time was just like, stop, just stop. What's the point? But I kept having to remind myself that giving up is the easy option. So when you realize that you don't have to be perfect at something, you can make steps to being good at something. And I'm reminded of two great quotes that I love by Paula Scher. So I don't know if anyone will know who Paula Scher is here. She's like a god in the design world. But she says it better than I do. So she said, it took me a few seconds to draw it, but it took me 34 years to learn how to draw it in a few seconds. So, you know, talking about how long it takes to be good at something. And then the second one was, it's through mistakes that you actually can grow. You have to get bad in order to get good. So, you know, she's talking about in both these quotes that growth takes a lot of time. And she's right. You have to be the worst at something before you can be the best at it. You have to not let perfect stand in the way of good. And you have to fail often. And unfortunately, there aren't any training montages in life, as much as I wish there was. So this is something that I added in one night after a couple of wines, and I watched Mulan. So Mulan has it's the greatest training montage of all time. It's not up for debate. So if you've never seen it, Mulan, she impersonates a male soldier in the Chinese army in order to stop her elderly father from being forced to fight. She starts off pretty bad, but she eventually trains hard enough in order to get this arrow down from this pole, which is like this big challenge, big moment in the film. Anyway, I thought about this with my wine in hand, and despite the montage only being the length of a song, in reality, it would take Mulan a hell of a lot of time to train to get that strong. So I looked at how long that section of the movie was. The song is 3 minutes and 22 seconds-ish, and the whole movie, about an hour and 28 minutes. So I did the maths, and I probably did it wrong. Again, I'm a designer. And it's around 3.6% of the film, when really it probably represents the longest period of time passed in that. So what I was trying to get at with that is that there are no shortcuts. We can't montage through our own learning process. You know, it highlights a couple of the failures and then all the achievements. Like, that's just not how it works. We have to work really hard and make a lot of mistakes to get to that point. I know it's a stupid thing to add to this talk, but so on the topic of failing, last kind of thing I want to advocate for is celebrating the little wins. It doesn't matter how small. Like, look at this little horse. He's really building himself up to jump off that tiny little thing, but he celebrates about it. So it's my visual representation of celebrate the little wins. Like, if you're going through something and you're failing a lot, you have to hang on to like the really positive parts through that. You know, having that amazing moment where you've worked out this piece of code which has been driving you up the wall for the last few hours, or, you know, like I was doing on the video editing thing, when I finally reached a point where things were making sense. Like, celebrate it in any little way. So okay, aside from that, talking about imposter syndrome, failure, I want to touch on expectations, and address this question of, like, am I doing enough? A question that sometimes pops into my head a lot. So I believe that the industry that we work in does perpetuate this idea that we should always be doing something. We should always be busy. We should be making a podcast. We should be reading 52 books a year. We should have a side hustle, which is a term I hate. But yeah, expectation feels like this burden on your shoulders because of the industry that we're in and that we work in. Sometimes we can feel really lucky to be in a job that, you know, that we enjoy. So we get that expectation on our shoulders of we should be doing more in our spare time. And right now, during, you know, a global pandemic, I'm hearing this kind of stuff more than ever. People And I'm finding it's mostly people in positions of power and privilege, like this guy. And I know that because he's got letters after his name. They love to tell you that you should come out of quarantine with lockdown, with a new skill or, you know, a side hustle, new source of income. Like, it's a pandemic. If people can make it out of bed, brush their teeth and struggle through a day of work, if they have it, then that's enough, really. And have you ever heard this phrase, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life? Well, it's rubbish. It's a very dangerous way to frame it. Just because you love your job doesn't mean it isn't work. Like, it takes up a lot of hours of your day. You put a lot into it. It's work, no matter how much you love what you do. And this way of thinking just perpetuates that idea that we should be filling our spare time with more work. So here's an interesting bit, considering the audience I'm speaking to. As a designer, I'm constantly posed with this question. Should designers code? Designers who code are more valuable. Should designers code? Maybe. Should designers write? Yes. Should designers know how to sell? Absolutely. Like, I'll be honest, I'm focusing on the code side right now. I've always considered learning how to code. But it was only because of that expectation of, you know, I should be doing more. I should be doing more because what I do isn't work. And what I decided to do this year was actually give it a go. Not this year, it was last year. The goal in my head was to like dip my toes in the water and see whether it was something I actually wanted to add into my career. So I joined this group called Project Function. They're a wonderful bunch who provide free education in web development to like minority groups and underprivileged individuals within the tech industry. Super great cause. Like, I donate some money to them now because I used to be part of their group. Like, I had a blast there. I learned HTML, CSS, and a bit of JavaScript, Annie.net. But after I'd graduated that course, there's me getting my certificate. I made my mind up. Like, should designers code? I don't know. Should this designer code? No. And what's important here is that I decided that it wasn't for me. Like, I didn't let the expectation push me into having to do it. So if you're a designer who wants to code, or if you're a developer who wants to learn design, make it your own decision to make. Don't let anyone tell you to do it. And just for reference, like, this book talks a lot about how you use your spare time and like how you should value your time. So Sarah Knight wrote this book. She also did a TED talk there as well. And essentially she kind of talks about how if your time was money, like, where would you spend it? Why would you spend your time on things that you don't want to do? Yeah, I used to be really rubbish at spending my time wisely, and I kept putting other people's needs before my own, which is the reference to the talk title. Like, don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, or you'll burn out. Yeah. So yeah, saying no to things is like something I've really learned how to do. It's a really courageous act of self-love to say no to things that you don't have the time or the energy to do. Like, don't let anyone else tell you how to spend your time. And I think in terms of expectation, I think there's some blame to put on job adverts that look a bit like this. So this is one for like, yeah, this is one of these typical job adverts that you see. They ask for like a unicorn, ninja, guru, wizard. Like, that creature doesn't exist. And if by some miracle you can find someone like that, then you've got to pay them well. And that's what the usual missing ingredient is from these job adverts. I interviewed for a job once where like they wanted an all-round designer, brand, print, and web design. I didn't get the job, and they told me why. It's because I didn't have any coding experience at the time. It wasn't even in the job description. And again, I started feeling these horrible feelings of failure. But, you know, really, I dodged a bullet, and I'm glad that it didn't happen. And I weep for the person that did get that job role, because I know that the salary was far too low and they'll be undervalued. for the huge amount of skills that they can offer. Yeah, in my experience, kind of the best teams are made up of like T-shaped teams, but I'm gonna skip through this bit. Yeah, I think employers probably need to start looking for T-shaped teams rather than unicorns. These kind of unicorn people don't really get given enough time to complete all these strings of things they're asked to do because of their huge skill set. And if you don't allow your employees the time and like resources to do what you do, to do what they need to do, you end up pushing them too hard and you end up with crunch. So crunch is a term used to describe like overworking and putting in really long hours, usually to meet a deadline. So you might crunch if you're trying to get a load of work done before you go on holiday, for example. However, crunch culture is when a business is moving this kind of style of working from a short-term to a long-term thing, and this starts to become the normal way of things working. So last year at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, not the one that's just been, but the one before, Tim Cook rounded off his speech by thanking the team for giving up their nights and their weekends with their families in order to get this work done. It's not surprising to hear that come from one of the biggest companies in the world, but it's still a bit shocking. Like, crunch culture is a huge problem in the tech industry. It's probably most prevalent in games development. So like Fortnite, anything by Telltale Games, Red Dead Redemption 2, all games that we might love. Well, they're all built on crunch, unfortunately, from underpaid and undervalued staff. Expecting people to give up their valuable time without the pay. And that kind of style of working means that you're either, not managing your schedules or your deadlines correctly, or even worse, deliberately taking advantage of your staff and exploiting them. So ultimately, crunch can end up causing burnout. And as someone who's paid to be creative on cue, I can't really tell you how dangerous burnout is to my career. Like, if I burn out, I can't do my job, and it's a very competitive industry that I'm in, so it's not really an option. So yeah, I think if any of us are experiencing this kind of toxic work culture, I think it's probably time to call it out. Like, it's really encouraging to see a lot of American kind of tech companies are starting to unionize and try and fight against this. But if you're an employer, you have a responsibility to your staff. You have to identify that this is happening within your company. Like, if overworking your staff has moved from this temporary kind of tied over solution to a full-time way of working and is embedded in the culture of your work, then there's something wrong and it has to change. So lastly, I'd like to talk about maintaining a good work-life balance. So this was me when I hit that spike, remember on the graph? This was me trying to maintain a work-life balance at that point. As someone who was exposed to crunch culture, was suffering from imposter syndrome to the high heavens, and having that feeling of like always being busy, saying yes to things, and yeah, my life revolved around work, basically. And as someone who had that passion for what they do, like, I love being a designer, and I just felt really lucky to be in that job. I just thought that all of that was normal. So when I left my job before last, which was around the time of that spike, I took the step back and evaluated what was important to me. I quit that job without finding a new one, which was probably a bad idea, but it gave me that kind of space to really evaluate what I wanted from a job, and it was a bit of a clean slate opportunity. So I attended a Women in Tech event. Ashley Smith did a talk. She hosts Women in Tech York, so any .NET York people, I would highly recommend going for that. But she did a talk about negotiation, and it centered around negotiating for money mostly. And I was okay with that. I had the confidence to ask for that. I wasn't afraid of asking for that at all. But the talk also spoke about negotiating for time. And that wasn't really something I'd considered before. In my head, I'd considered like flexi time as something reserved for people with kids, like families. But I started to think, like, I'm someone who doesn't know if they even want to have kids. So why should I value my time any less? So that was it. That was like the rock in the ground I had to have. I wanted to have flexible hours. Like, I wanted to go out and do stuff when I wanted to do it. I wanted to start work when I wanted to do it. And yeah, I work in a job now where you can essentially work whatever hours you want, as long as you work the hours, like the total hours per month. I think we're at a point now where companies, you know, in our industry are open to that. And in the time of coronavirus, I think a lot of companies are being forced to recognize this way of working. Because the difference in how people work is important. Like, some people might be real night owls and work better at nighttime, and some people might work really well at like 6 a.m. in the morning. So giving people the tools and like the options to work how they work best, you're going to get, you know, you're going to get good work out of them. So be more open to it. So yeah, I would suggest that you find your own kind of rock in the ground and either seek it out or maybe even negotiate for it. Maybe your workplace will be up for it. I did it. I didn't negotiate for it. I went out and found a new job where I had that opportunity, but I know of other people who have been able to negotiate for the things that make their job easier and just make them produce better work. So yeah. Just in relation to the current situation that we're in, the lockdown situation, like, I hear a lot online about how lockdown is going to open up employers' eyes to the possibilities of remote working. And in a lot of ways, I definitely agree. Like, there's a lot of companies out there who said they couldn't do remote working, and guess what? They are doing it. It's not so difficult, is it? But in other ways, I don't really want this period of time to be an example of what fully remote working can be like, because it's not. Like, it's not benchmark for remote working. Lockdown remote working is not remote working. Many people are struggling with mental health. Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I found my mind wandering to some really horrible places throughout the day because of it. Like, a lot of people now have children running around their house that they didn't necessarily have before, and they have to juggle that responsibility. Many people have become carers, the people that they love. Some people have lost the ones that they love to this as well. So yeah, I don't think we can expect the same productivity from these people right now. Like, I'm sorry, but we can't. And in that sense, we shouldn't judge how effective fully remote working is right now. It's just food for thought. It's just something I wanted to add, really. It's important that we look after ourselves first and foremost at the minute. Like, look outside. Okay, maybe not the situation with like the pubs and stuff now, but it's what the country's doing now. They're staying inside. We're looking after our physical health, but we also have to look after our mental health and our minds while we're inside as well. So yeah, I'm just going to wrap this up. This isn't a plea for you to like start being a total diva at your workplace and demanding things from your boss, especially not right now. It's probably a more difficult time now, but it's just some nuggets of information I've put together, and hopefully there's something in there that's valuable. I was a little worried that maybe some of it wouldn't resonate with this audience. I've spoken at some tech meetups before, but maybe not quite as technical one as this one. I've spoken at a JavaScript one once before. But yeah, most of all, like, if there's one thing in here that maybe just gives you a little kick up the arse, then that's cool. Like, it's hard right now. So my ultimate message is just to like be kind to people and be kind to yourself as well, most of all. These are some of the takeaways from the talk. So recognizing what triggers those horrible feelings, reviewing how you speak to others as well as yourself, reframing your failures as more of an opportunity, celebrating little wins. Like, I find that really important right now. Valuing your time. I know, like, we're stuck at home now and we have a lot of screen time, and it's kind of difficult to separate work and personal life, so that work-life balance is difficult. And yeah, negotiating for what you need to do in order to do your job is, you know, seek it out or find it, because otherwise you're not going to produce the best work. And yeah. Yeah, that's it. I've rambled on too long. But yeah, that's it. That's my talk. Thank you very much for having me, everyone.
Very good.